What?
You know what I'm saying, though, because originally chicken with cheese wasn't, chicken with milk wasn't prohibited.
Right.
But then to make a fence around the Torah,
right.
the rabbis prohibited it. So in the 5 books of Moses and in the Talmud,
okay,
there's
so the lesbian act,
women munching on women. But
okay, I can answer that. As far as the homosexual act goes, it doesn't involve lesbians. When the Torah has, but there's a separate halacha, one of the 613, which talks about promiscuity, and there's a word for that. I can't think of the word, but let's just say promiscuous.
Elias Rias.
Well, promiscuousness, and it says you shouldn't be promiscuous. Okay, and women doing that with each other would fall in a category of that. However, it wouldn't take on the. It's a bigger isser. It's a bigger restriction.
Much worse
for the male. It's considered an abomination.
Yeah.
And there's different types of death penalty.
Makes God cry.
There's different types of death penalties. There's 4 of them, and the worst one is saved for the male homosexual act people. Whereas the lesbian, it's an isser law. It goes against the Torah, but there's no death penalty to it.
And I don't think there are any 2 men in all of P.K. Robertson who've done more to try to stop women from having sex with women than Rabbi Rabs and myself. So I just want to get that out there.
If you say so.
So this week's Torah portion is Pinchas.
Oh, okay. Woo, we're going to talk about that.
And somewhere around this Torah portion, it's not really this Torah portion, but I just heard an interesting point that I've never heard before. I've always had a hard time with God commanding genocide in the Torah.
Like Amalek.
Yeah, like wipe out Amalek, wipe out the Canaanites, wipe out the Midianites. I've always had a hard time with that. Then I heard a fascinating thing from Dennis Prager. He noted God never commands genocide. God only commands expulsion. All the commands of genocide come from Moses. So when Moses says, "Shall we bring forth water from the rock, you rebels?" we don't automatically assume that Moses is right in saying the good thing. So if whenever God is speaking, he says, "Expel the people from Canaan," but when Moses is speaking, he says, "Wipe them out," is Moses automatically channeling God when he says wipe him out, or is that Moses perhaps getting it wrong? Because Moses failed to stand up at Baal Peor. Moses was passive, and he didn't act. Pinchas acted, so then Moses in Deuteronomy is like mad, probably mad at himself because he didn't act, and so Moses is commanding genocide, but God never commands genocide. God commands expulsion. What do you think?
And one thing at a time. Let me. I have to go now and look. I've not heard this, at all.
Isn't it fascinating?
Yeah.
But even if it's wrong, that's interesting.
Yes, it's interesting. I need to. I don't have it with me because I don't have all the different. I only have the midbar, but I have to look up and see the wording on this because we're taking his word for it, and I don't necessarily take Dennis Prager's word for anything. No offense to you.
None taken.
But he's not my Torah Gadol that I go to. Okay, so. I have to go look and see. This is my homework for next week, is to see when it talks about, you said the difference between expel and exterminate.
Yeah.
When it comes to who?
The Canaanites in particular. But God never commands genocide in the Torah, according to Prager. I'm not a Torah scholar, but he said all the commands of genocide.
Torah says, God says, blot out the memory of Amalek. I mean, he says, wipe them out.
Okay, let's just, maybe Dennis was referring to the Canaanites, but
God punished Saul, King Shaul. If you know the story,
right?
Saul had a chance to completely annihilate all of the Amaleks, and he allowed one to. One was dying or something. I forget how the story goes exactly. There was one that was still alive, but he was dying. It was the king or something. And before he died, he had a chance to rape a woman, and the woman got pregnated from it, and from there came Haman. I mean, they kept the thing going, and God punished Saul. You know, Samuel came to Saul and said, "Hey, buddy, you fucked up because you had a chance right there to wipe out Amalek, and you let it still keep going." So that's a God thing. That's not a Moses thing. So I don't know, but I will check on the verbiage on the Midianites and the Canaanites versus what goes on in Deuteronomy. And I'll come back with that next week. Remind me next week too. The thing I wanted to mention, though, that you did mention, which I agree on, was Pinchas Like you mentioned, Moshe Rabbeinu took a back seat on the whole Baal Por thing. And that's why Pinchas had to come and go, well, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it myself, and took the big spear and killed them. That is 100% true. Moses did take a back seat on that.
No Haman, no Haman Tashin.
No Haman, no, is that what it says?
That's Lakewood Rav.
Lakewood, that's true. No, yeah.
No Amalek, no Haman, no Haman, no Haman Tashin. And tell everyone what Haman Tashin is.
Haman Tashin is it's a Jewish
candy pastry.
It's a pastry with a fill. It's like a fruit fill. Sometimes it has prune. It's like a Danish. It's a Danish. That's the word I want. Danish. And it's shaped in a triangle because Haman used to wear a triangle hat. So it's to remember that
we eat it on Purim.
We eat it on Purim and remember that this guy was a bad guy and he got killed.
So, do you have any thoughts on this week's Torah portion? A lot of it's really boring.
Why is it boring?
Seriously, you find the very detailed list of the number of bulls to sacrifice.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Okay, first of all, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Pinchas is the most commonly read Torah portion of the entire Torah. The entire Sefer Torah, we read from this week's parsha more often than any other parsha.
How so?
Because what you just mentioned, the karbanos, all the offerings that we do for Rosh Chodesh, for all the various Yom Tovim, whether it be for Pesach, Passover, Shavuos, whatever, all of those are defined. All of the karbanos, all of the offerings are defined in this week's Torah parsha. So every time that we have a holiday or we have Rosh Chodesh once a month, we bring out Maftir. And someone has to read from Maftir. The Maftir is from this week's parsha. So this parsha is always rolled towards, and Pinchas gets read a lot. Now the question would immediately be, why Pinchas? Why did God slap all of this in Pinchas? He could have picked this all up and put it in a different parsha, couldn't he?
Yeah.
There's no reason. And why Pinchas? Like, if we're going to read something the most often, wouldn't you read it something having to do with Moshe? Why isn't there a parsha called Moshe? Right, Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the leader of Jewish people. And slap the part about the karbanos there. So we have to understand that the reason why it's Pinchas is because Pinchas did something that Moshe didn't even do, and you mentioned this. Moshe sat back and didn't get involved in the Baal Por. Didn't want to get involved in the drama. He was content to sit back. It's not going the way it should go, and there's this guy, and he's banging the shiksa right in the shul. We talked about that last week. Yeah. But he's not going to you're not going to stir trouble now. He's not going to get involved, right? It should have been Moshe that picked up the spear and gave the guy what for. But Pinchas said, no, you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. There's a Mishnah that says in Pirkei Avos, B'makom she'ein anoshim ishtadol yosish. In a place where there's no men, you have to strive to be a man. Yeah. What does that mean? When you see, even if you see that nobody else is doing what they should be doing, you have to take the initiative and you have to do it. Even if it makes you unpopular. It doesn't matter. Everybody else, all the leaders, it doesn't matter, could all be going one direction, and if you know that that's not the right direction, then you have to take a stand and demonstrate what they should do. And that's actually, like we've been doing here ourselves. And like I took a stand today about the reform. That might not make me popular with a lot of people watching. Right. I took a stand against, gay parades. Right. That may not make me popular, but I don't care, because it's not about popularity. Torah, God doesn't care for popular. That's not something we should strive to be. I may be popular, but that's not something I strive for. What God wants is to do what's right and stand up for Torah. Standing up for Torah is the most important thing, even if you do it alone. Even if you do it alone, that's the most important thing. To be the voice of Torah and to say this is wrong or this is the right thing to do, even when everybody's going against you, that's what God likes. And because Pinchas did that, that's why we read his parsha the most often. Because God likes the guy that stands up and says, "God, this is what God wants."
Yeah. So, but what about most of this week's Torah portion is about how many bulls to sacrifice on which holiday and census stuff, and how are you able to maintain your focus and attention to things like that?
Well, because you want to say it's not